So as I mentioned at the beginning of Mass, the bishops of our nation, which I believe is a fruit of the Eucharistic revival, has decided in honor of the 25th anniversary of the birth of our nation to, as a collective group of men, spiritual fathers of all the dioceses throughout the world, the Church here in America, are consecrating our nation to the most sacred heart of Jesus on the vigil of the most sacred heart. So it's a great time of grace for us, and these days leading up to the Feast of the Sacred Heart, we should be praying, opening our hearts to these graces. Again, of course, the shepherds of the Church have authority, spiritual authority over all the members of the Church, especially the nation as a whole. So it's a beautiful thing to see our leaders, our spiritual fathers, taking their authority by entrusting our nation to the Sacred Heart. So wait to see the miracles that are going to happen, right? So I want us as faithful people to open ourselves to these graces, to ask for these graces, to open our hearts to these graces, to pray. The Novena of the Sacred Heart already began this week, but if you haven't prayed it, can just continue to pray. Ask the Sacred Heart of Jesus to give us those graces that we need as a nation, as a whole, but also all the individuals, all the people in our country, and of course our own selves and our families as well. Padre Pio, as you know, had a great devotion to the Sacred Heart of Jesus. Every day we pray the efficacious Novena of the Sacred Heart that comes from the excerpts of St. Margaret Mary's writings. So Padre Pio did this on a daily basis, praying for all those who press his prayers, all those who entrust themselves to his intercession. So I think we can unite ourselves with Padre Pio's prayers to the most sacred heart of Jesus, especially tonight as we honor him this first Friday of the month of June. When I was a young boy, I remember coming across the promises of the Sacred Heart, and different promises kind of jumped out at me. One was that I will bless any place where an image of my heart is exposed and honored. Now, I hope all of you have an image of the Sacred Heart in your homes, and trusting your homes to the Sacred Heart of Jesus. Maybe your workplace, you could have an image there as well. But he blessed any place where the image of his heart is exposed and honored. One promise was, I'll bring peace to their families. I don't know about you, but I can bring peace in my family, right? So to have devotion to the Sacred Heart, he promised to bring peace in families. Other promises are those of, basically, if you're a temperate soul, you become fervent. And if you're a fervent soul, you'll become even more fervent, right? You'll grow to the greater heights of holiness. Again, all of us grow in holiness by devotion to the Sacred Heart. It's very important for us to, as devotion, increase that grace of his life within us. One promise that jumped out at me was, I will give to priests the grace to touch the most hardened of hearts. Now, when I was a young boy, I wanted to be a priest since kindergarten. And I remember I was a very shy kid and kind of a little nervous kid. And I kind of had a sense of how am I going to be able to, go out, reach out to people and preach and teach and kind of put myself out there. Even at a young age, I remember this fear that I had. And I remember reading that promise, and it brought me great comfort, thinking, okay, well, all I got to do is be to go to the Sacred Heart, and he'll take care of the rest, right? And it's true, I can tell you as a priest, many situations I was put in, and normally I wouldn't want to be in those situations, but the Lord gave me the grace to touch the most hardened hearts, and to give people the sacraments, especially when they need it the most. But the most important promise, the last promise, and that is of the first Friday communions, right? Promise for those who receive Holy Communion in the state of grace on 9 consecutive First Fridays will not die in his displeasure nor without receiving their sacraments. This is why the nuns used to take you to church if you went to Catholic school on First Friday, starting in September, ending in June. Because if you start in September and you end in June, that's 9 consecutive First Fridays, and those nuns want to make sure every one of their students went to heaven one day and they died in the sacraments. I can tell you, many times I've been in people's deathbeds, knowing that they were away from the sacraments for many years, but knowing that they went to Catholic school and they probably did those 9 consecutive First Fridays, and they made sure that I was there giving them their sacraments so that they could die in God's grace. Unfortunately, we don't have even First Friday Masses much anymore. But that doesn't mean that you and I cannot do this First Friday devotion of receiving Holy Communion for that grace to die, to persevere in the end, to receive the sacraments of the Church. To hit this home, if you you want to follow my Instagram, I'm sorry for repeating myself, because I gave this homily at St. Patrick's Cathedral on Wednesday. But in here yet, I want to share this story, because it really hit home to me, this devotion to the Sacred Heart. So when I was a Dodson seminarian from Carmelite, before I was a priest, I was assigned to a parish in Staten Island, and I was helping out in this parish for the summer months, kind of an internship. And I wanted to do all the cool things that priests do. You know, they get kind of some experience in the field, so to speak. So I wanted to visit the sick, I wanted to teach some kids in the Bible camp, I wanted to do all the kind of glorified, fun stuff that priests get to do. You know, bring communion, bury the dead, so visit people, all that type of stuff. But this one day, the pastor says to me, well, the secretary didn't come in, so you have to sit and answer the phones. Now, this is not my idea of ministry, okay? Sitting at the rectory phone waiting for a drink, you know? I want to be out in the field, burying the dead, healing the sick, teaching the students, right? So I would sit at the rectory waiting for the phone to ring. But by God's grace, the phone did ring that day, and this woman was on the other line, very sad. Her name was Lillian. She was a parishioner. I didn't get to meet her yet. I just got back to the parish. And she's very sad. She's crying on the phone, and she says, you know, my husband, Joe, he's got back from the doctors, and they only gave him a couple weeks to live. And I'm wondering if you could put him on the sick list in the church for the read Mass for the sick. So I said, of course, I wrote down his name. But the first thing I thought of, I said, well, did he receive the sacraments yet? Would you like him to receive the sacraments? And she said, oh, that'll be fine. So I said, well, ask the pastor. So I went to the pastor, and he said, oh yeah, let's go right now. So we went right over to the house, and Joe received the sacraments. After he received the sacraments, Lillian goes on to tell us that, you know, since they were married, the priest who prepared them for marriage invited them to consecrate their marriage in a special way to the Sacred Heart of Jesus, and really encouraged them to do that, to foster that devotion, that married life to the Sacred Heart, especially for the first Friday devotions. And they took this very seriously. As a couple, all the years of their marriage, about 40 years they were married, they never missed the first Friday. Not just the non-consecutive ones, but they did it over and over and over. Even he was a fireman, she was a manager of a bank. And they even said when they were tithing, they would go, of course, to Mass, and they had a house in Florida, they died down in Florida. It was First Friday, they would make sure they found the Catholic Church in New, went to Mass, got back in the car, and continued their journey to Florida. They never missed the first Friday. And then she looks at me, the pastor, and says, you know, this is going to be the first time in 40 years that Joe and I are going to miss First Friday because of his illness. He can't leave the house. So I looked at her, I looked at the pastor, and I said, no, stop, come tomorrow, we'll do communion. So I did. And I went through communion regularly, almost every day, every other day. Well, as it was getting closer to the Feast of the Sacred Heart, I had a sense that Joe was going to go home on the Feast of the Sacred Heart of Jesus because of his devotion. So, Feast of the Sacred Heart, Friday there, it was June 15th, remember the date, and I just saw them the day before. The Feast of Cinnante was their wedding anniversary, so I saw them a couple days before that. But I knew how to get there on the Feast of the Sacred Heart of Jesus. But it was a crazy busy day in the parish. We had 2 funerals, and serving funeral mass, attached to the burial. I never carved the times, I relied on the funeral director, right in the cemetery. And there was a wake in the afternoon, I had to go to the wake. So I was in and out, running around all morning, serving mass, funerals, burials, and wake services. Now it's about 3 o'clock, I'm tired, I'm getting upstairs, just put my feet up and relax. And I said, no, I gotta get to Joe. Bring him home to me. It's the Feast of the Sacred Heart of Jesus. So I met up and I walked him out to the house. And I brought Holy Communion, and there he was with his wife, and they couldn't have children, they wanted to have children, they weren't able to have children. They were everyone's favorite aunt and uncle, the neighbors, the kids of the neighborhood would come over, even when I was there, in and out of the house, and it was a very beautiful kind of community that they fostered around him. So they're all there, around his bed, nieces, nephews, neighbors, praying. So I give Holy Communion, I put on a spoon of water because he could barely swallow. So he received his last communion, he got it home, and I prayed the chaplet by mercy, and then I left. The next day, I got a phone call that he died about half an hour after I left, within the hour of mercy. And you can't make that up. Devoted to the Sacred Heart of Jesus, dying with the sacraments, receiving Holy Communion half an hour before he died, at 3 o'clock, within the hour of mercy, the chaplet by mercy, prayed by his bed, promise of that, praying like a better dying person, surrounded by his family and friends. Beautiful way to end your life. A beautiful way to begin your eternal life. This devotion to Sacred Heart is very powerful. I encourage you to fast this devotion, especially the first Fridays. If you did 9 consecutive ones, it's good to receive communion and reparation, communions and reparation on the first Friday of the month. Asking God's mercy to restore Sacred Heart, that heart that was pierced for you and for me at the cross, that heart filled with love, and mercy, and salvation. In a few moments, you and I are going to receive the heart of Jesus in the Eucharist. Let us answer Christ's call to receive his heart with faith and devotion, being a comfort to his heart today, praying reparation for those who do not appreciate himself in the Eucharist, maybe through sacrilegious communion, sacrilegious acts, blasphemy. Let us be a comfort to the heart of Jesus tonight. Let us receive him with faith, love, and devotion. Let us implore his mercy for us, for our families, for the church, our nation, and the whole world, praying for his Eucharistic triumph of his heart, the Immaculate Heart of Mary, our Mother. In Jesus Christ we praise, now and forever. Amen.